Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are here with the boy Adam Jackson. Thank you for coming on, Adam. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
Doing pretty good.
Fantastic. Excited.
The interview questions are going to start because I know we're a little early. We're about 4 minutes early, so we're just going to have a couple minute intro while the people row in here. It will be starting at exactly 1 p.m. PST. But outside of that, how has the day been for you? Very easy icebreaker, so we would waste the 3 minutes before we get going.
Yeah, totally. It's been wild. We've got so much stuff going on between working on season 4, more seasons and things coming up in the future. Lots of planning, lots of talks. The season's going to be coming out soon, and I expect a whole lot of feedback and reaction to that. So it's a busy time over here, but pretty exciting as well.
Nice, man. It sounds like you guys are going to have a pretty interesting launch because season 4 is coming out here very shortly, and I think itemization is going to be the big talk. We do have some questions related to both itemization, what's going to be next, etc., for you to go through here on the list. Before we get started, we have to do a quick thing and make sure everyone here can hear the audio just fine. Can you hear GHAZZY? So GHAZZY, can you say a sentence?
I can say a sentence, absolutely. Super excited for the release. Minions, that's all I'm saying.
And Adam, if literally anything at all you want to say.
Yeah, test. I also am a minion enjoyer, it turns out.
So I've
Excited
heard.
to talk about them.
I don't know. Don't get GHAZZY star the minions when we get going, man. That's gonna.
We've spent like the last few days. So I've told DM you got to make sure that I don't go off on a rant here because we're gonna spend the next 45 minutes on that topic. So we've done our best to make sure we don't get stuck there. Okay.
I'm trying to keep him on a leash from the whole thing being a necromancer interview, but we'll do what we have to do. So
I get it. Everyone has their thing. Some people it's druid wolves, some people it's necro minions, some people it's breaking the game with barb permanently. Everybody's got their thing.
All right. So with that being said, I think we've stalled enough to let the people roll in. If you're not here by now, we're just going to get going. We kind of we're wasting a minute or two because we're a couple minutes early. But with that being said, thank you everyone for joining across the different live stream platforms for this interview with Blizzard's own Adam Jackson. Before we get going, you want to just say who you are, what your job is over there for the people that for some reason don't happen to know.
Yeah, totally. So, hi everybody. My name is Adam Jackson. I'm the lead class designer, specifically on the live classes team. So, our group handles a lot of the pretty much all of the balance updates that you see going into the game for classes. We also are heavily involved in systems and the stuff that you see really in seasonal and expansion releases that have to do with the things that you farm and why, and the classes themselves, and the new legendaries, uniques going in, that kind of stuff.
And GHAZZY, introduce yourself for the people that don't know.
Minion Andy, I guess is the easiest way to describe it. I do mostly written guides content for ARPG games, mostly for Path of Exile, Diablo 4, Last Epoch recently. Just a hard minion enjoyer. I can't get enough of it.
Minion Andy GHAZZY. And then, of course, I'm DM. And with that being said, we're going to get going. So thank you, first of all, for joining us for the interview. It is now 1 p.m. PST. We're going to start with our first question. So right out of the get-go, we have some questions. Hopefully we can get to all of them. If we don't, it's all good. We're going to start with the first one here, which is with the recent focus of gameplay being post 100, the 1 to 50 process a little faster than it used to be on launch, right? What are the team's thoughts on progressing the Paragon system? An example being like new Paragon boards, etc.
Yeah. So I think there's definitely room, I believe, and this is like my personal opinion talking here, but I think that there's definitely room to make Paragon more interesting. Adding new boards and things is always on the table. That is something that we can do, and probably is something that we will do. But the way that we kind of think of Paragon is that it's kind of your one-stop shop where we try to make stats cool, right? Like why you care about strength, why you care about whatever stats you're chasing. Like it's one of those places where we try to make it a little bit more interesting and robust. I think we did a decent job at the launch game with Paragon, but I think that there's more that we could add to the depth of the system to make it just more appealing. We did a little bit of that in season 2. If you remember, we started adding scaling mechanics where we turn some of your stats that are always additive into multiplicative scaling stats, like usually in legendary Paragon nodes and other places. But that's kind of a little bit of experimentation in that regard. I would expect that we do more in the future. Of course, nothing to announce, but that's kind of how we're thinking about it right now, is that it's cool. We think there's more opportunity to do cool things there. Something simple like adding new boards. Yeah, I don't think there's really a high risk there, and it's something that I could totally see us doing.
I'm curious to the idea of the further development of the Paragon system, because I know in the interview you had with Rax, the question regarding the skill tree was that the idea was to not further develop that, at least not too much, for the sake of new and newer players. And then after level 50, we see a progression of that part being the game focus for the company. But how do you see that? Well, how does the team think about the progression of that development without making it too advanced for those players?
Yeah, good question. Paragon board sits in a different place than the skill tree, right? Skill tree is like the very first thing you're introduced to as a player. So keeping that experience really easy to understand and robust for someone that's never played an ARPG before is a much harder task compared to Paragon, where Paragon, you've already gotten pretty far into the game or beat the campaign is our expectation. So we're allowed to add more complexity at that point in the game. That being said, there are some like UX issues that I think we know about with Paragon. Like, it can be a pain to reset and fill in all the many little blips that you have to. Like, I think those are actually more concerning issues that I would rather see us tackle than only adding new content. I think we can do both, of course. But these are kinds of the things of the problems that we're looking to solve, I guess you could say, with Paragon. Simplicity is always a factor because we do want people to understand our game, and ARPGs are notoriously crunchy. But if there is a place that we can be a little crunchier, I would say it is in Paragon, if anywhere in our game, if that makes sense.
That's fair. We can move on to the next question we have is that as many people are planning their builds in Season 4, and we would like to ask for some clarity pre-launch regarding tempering affixes, mostly due to the fact that the patch notes stated that they'd be balanced but lack specific details. And I guess the same question applies to core modifiers such as ranks of Golem Mastery being available on multiple item slots.
Yeah, lots of people like to ask about Golem Mastery. So I guess what I would say is when it comes to patch notes and what we show to players between PTR and live is that we kind of have rules and guidelines for how we present patch notes and what we put in them for between releases. And PTR is kind of a special case because PTR, we're introducing new content to you for the first time, but then the live patch is actually when we introduce that content for real, and I'm using air quotes, right? Because not everybody is expected to play the PTR. PTR is also notoriously not balanced because it's way earlier in development than when we would normally release something. And so, managing expectations and how we present patch notes is something that we're still figuring out. And what that really means is, when we introduce whole new systems to the game, we don't specify every single little detail of them. As an example, in the PTR, when we introduce the recipes, we don't list every single tempering recipe and what the numbers are right now in the PTR notes, because like our notes are already huge. It would blow them out and make them way bigger, right? And then if we, don't put them in PTR, but then we put them in live, then we blow out those notes. And then it's like, well, why didn't you put them in PTR? And then if we only show the difference, like only show the things that we changed, then people are wondering, well, why did you only show like half the tempering recipes? Because those are the ones that you changed, but you're not showing the rest. And then it can get confusing of like, well, where are the rest of the recipes, right? Like, why don't you just show it all? And so like, it's an easy kind of thing to get caught up in what we show. So in the future, I think we can show more. It just means that we would have to like commit to showing that in the PTR, which then means there's more pressure on the PTR release to have those things in a better state and actually quantify out the bigger list of changes, right? So it depends. But as far as like specifics, if you want to know some of the things like that are changing with tempering, there's a whole lot of number changes. Most of them are minor and aren't really that big of a deal. We did shift around where a few of the recipes or not, like what stats are in what recipes and that kind of stuff to make more sense based on feedback. And then we did adjust some things that were just the typical, this is early in development and wasn't intended at all, but it's PTR. So, this is when you get to see it. The ranks of Golem Masteries in that category, I think people were getting crazy, like 25 plus or something ranks. No, it's supposed to be just like every single other passive that you get. It's only in, very few slots, and it's very special when you get it. So, if you were planning on making a Golem build where they slam for 2 billion damage, you're not going to do it via mastery ranks. But I'm sure there's other ways to still make things crazy.
Yeah, GHAZZY got his minion. He got his minion question and he got an answer there, nice and early. Got it out of the way. Since we're talking about the PTR, I just want to slip an additional follow-up to that. Did you guys get out of the PTR what you were hoping to get? I know the players were excited to actually get their hands on the PTR and test it out, etc. But I'm curious if you guys got what you were hoping to get out of launching a PTR.
Oh, absolutely. In spades. When we release very large swaths of the game, like I would say the launch was the closest to this. Season 2 was moderately close to this, but I think this is bigger than that because we updated all of itemization, right? We gave people stats and powers that they never had access to, not limited to uniques where we can very control, like, hey, you get this very specific, special, powerful thing. But in items like, tempering affixes and things where we let you get bonus projectiles across the board or area size, those are very high risk things from our point of view. And by risk, I mean like, not only are they scary because of balance, but they're scary because of like PC performance and breaking servers and stuff. Because a lot of our game wasn't made in mind with every projectile could not just have one more, but be doubled in the amount. Sure. Or, the size of these skills were handcrafted to be, this is the size. And, we may have a back alley deal like, yep, we're never going to do that again. Have a handshake. We're never going to increase it, whatever, because this is what the size is going to be. And then we're like, oh, wait, we want to double it and do more than, actually, we did more than double it in PTR. We didn't even have a cap. And so we have to figure out like how we're going to manage these things for the long term and be healthy in the game. PTR was incredibly helpful for that. We got a ton of balance feedback, which is nice. But I would say the bigger important one was like, how does the game feel? Like the playing through the whole experience of tempering, masterworking, and that progression. We can have an idea of it, but when you have 50, 100, 200, even 1,000 people playing it, it's not nearly as much information as you would think compared to like 10 million people playing it, right? Or whatever. Sure. Like when you throw numbers at something, you really see the cracks very quickly and very easily, and they're more clear. Whereas when we're only testing things internally, we'll be like, oh, this could be a problem, or oh, this doesn't feel great, but it might be fine, right? Like we can have a discussion and we're using our brains and figuring it out. But we don't have the surety that we do when we throw a ton of people at it, especially people who are experts on ARPGs like you guys and our other creators and even just hardcore community members that really like to crunch these numbers and figure things out. They'll find things in 5 minutes that might take us 5 days, right? So it's just efficient. Okay. So yeah. Short answer, yes, incredibly useful.
I appreciate the insight on that one. So moving on to the next question here. So one of the major things that are happening in Season 4 is obviously itemization. That rework is now being complete with Loot Reborn. What would you guys like to focus on next as your next sort of major focus?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I can't get super specific details, but I can give you ideas of how we're thinking about things right now.
Sure.
Immediate future, I think actually the focus of the team is on reacting to Season 4 and this big upheaval that we made to the game. I am very sure that there will be cracks in tempering and masterworking and the player journey as far as, the pit and how all of this feels when put together of like how good the game actually is. And those cracks are going to need to be iterated on and filled a little bit of like, hey, we need more tempering recipes here, or hey, the progression of the pit doesn't feel that great there, or whatever, right? Our immediate thing is because we upheavaled so much in our game, your whole end game way that you interact with Diablo 4 and your item progression is now a journey rather than just you hope the perfect item drops and you're done. Those are huge foundational things in ARPG. So making those and refining those to be good is the immediate largest concern by a pretty good amount. Like I think when you look at like what we're thinking of with updates with Season 5, right now, I'm being a little bit cagey of like, I need to leave some reaction time for my team and myself to like really look at Season 4 of what are the things that we need to react to quickly that would be the most benefit, the biggest bang for your buck in Season 5, for example. But thinking a little bit more long-term, like things that aren't immediate reactions to Season 4. I would say, we're definitely taking a stab at it in Season 4, but I think that there's still going to be room to try and make the end game better for longer. Like have that tail feel good for a longer period of time and have a little bit more refinement in that section of the game, so to speak. So we're thinking and talking a lot about that because it's been a thing that we've been, asked about by the community basically since we launched is like better end game, better end game, better end game. And so that's something that's on our mind. Also on the class side, personally, one of the things that's on my mind a lot is trying to catch up other classes to Barbarian because Barbarians have more weapons. This has been a big thorn in our side for a very long time of that they kind of have 2 class mechanics and everybody else has 1. And so our current plan is to kind of juice up those other classes so that they're really crazy, impactful, and good and feel awesome so that they kind of make up for the lack of aspects that Barbarians get. And itemization makes Barbarians stronger. Like there's a bunch of things that having more items makes difficult to balance, I would say. And so really having a firm, solid answer to that. We kind of addressed it a little bit in Season 4 with the Necromancer. is our first whack at this, where we just juiced the Book of the Dead and made it crazy, powerful, and good, and tried to do it in a way that wasn't just numbers, like make it cool, right? This is something I told my people a lot to focus on. And so we're going to see how that goes, but I want to do that for the other classes, right? So that's kind of one of the big things at the top of our mind on the class side.
So with in-game... Oh, sorry, go, GHAZZY.
I was just curious, like we talk about end game, that's the focus. End game, end game, end game. I'm curious about the definition. Like, what are we talking about when we say end game? Because that's different from, it's very subjective, right? Are we talking about level 50 to 100, or are we talking about post 100?
Yep. So funny you asked. I think Joe P mentioned it in an earlier interview. We used to think of endgame as everything after the campaign was our original definition when we launched the game, and we had to change our definition because that wasn't what players were thinking and saying, and the way that just people talked about our game. They thought endgame was post 100 or maybe world tier 4, right? And right now, I would say it's still not exactly perfect of what we think of when we say endgame. I think people still have various opinions. My definition of endgame is probably something close to world tier 4, and when that starts, or when you get to level 100 is an obvious benchmark that people can have. But in my mind, it's when you have access to all of the activities that you can do in the game, which to me would now probably be whenever you go into the pit. Because there's no activity after that is like a new activity that you could not access at all. So that's what I think of when I think of endgame. But I think if you ask 10 different people, you may get like 3 or 4 different answers. But that's kind of how we think about it and talk about it mostly on the team. Either that or level 100, if you want to think about it that way.
So how do you deal with the difficulty of creating in-game when players are able to consume the content quicker than almost any developer is going to be able to produce the in-game, while also shrinking the beginning portion of the game? You level to 100 faster than you ever have. You're able to get into these in-game activities faster than ever, but you're also at a deficit in terms of in-game content, so you're developing it while people are consuming it faster than you can. How do you resolve these issues?
Oh, God. This is a very long answer, and I could go into it for a long time, so I'll try to keep it brief. It's a very difficult problem, and it is one that I think every ARPG has, and it's one that we all have to kind of live with and mitigate, but there isn't a perfect forever solution. Because really what you're saying is, and this is like the two things that are competing, right, is players want content, and our game is a power fantasy. That's what ARPGs are, right? We sell you on, you do things to become more powerful, to have a new mountain to climb, to be more powerful, to have a new mountain to climb. Problem is, there are only so many mountains that we could make as a development team, right? Because the mountains are usually content. And so the difficulty that I think every ARPG runs into is you can only create so many mountains. So the first thing we try to do is create as many mountains as we can, right? Have as many various endgame activities and things for you to do that are interesting and awesome. And then, do that for as long as we can. But like you said, people are crazy and they consume content really, really quick. Some of them do, some of them not so much. And we have to balance between those two player types, which is a whole nother conversation. But then on the other side, for the people that can consume that content quickly, we want to make sure that there's things for them to do that are interesting and meaningful, right? And so this is why you see a very common way that ARPGs are designed is that we use random generated dungeons and random generated content for the end game. And why we do things like scale things either pretty hard or infinitely so that you have a challenge against your player power, right? Like player power goes up, you need something to fight against it as you're getting better. If you don't have something to fight against it, then really your answers are like make another character and do the journey again, or you get bored, leave, come back later, right? And those are kind of the options that a player has, or go against infinitely scaling content. That's kind of like the box that we're in when we're designing, and a lot of our work as designers is how do we make fun content and resolve these issues as best we can. A perfect solution requires like a paradigm shift, I think, of like you have to kind of change what an ARPG is and like make your game ARPG, but also a little bit of something else so that you don't have to worry about this problem. But in an ARPG space, I think this is kind of just what it is and how people progress through it. It is a challenge that we're forever going to have. And so you're going to see us, kind of bounce back and forth of like infinitely scaling content, but also matching that with milestone content or aspirational content is another word that people like to use that I like of, like Uber Lilith or these things where it's like, I get this thing, I see this thing, it's a fixed difficulty. I want to get good enough to beat that. And then I feel good and I can either stop or try and go to the next thing until there's things that run out. And then I'm happy and I leave happy, right? Our goal at the higher level is that you leave happy, right? And whether that means you're doing aspirational or you do forever content for a while and then you kind of churn out, we want to make sure both of those experiences feel good.
Sure.
That's fair. Listening to that answer, I mean, do you feel like, or would it be fair to say that the team's focus on effort right now has gone from the early stage of focusing on new player acquisition to more of an returning player focus and end-game replayability and longevity of the player base? Is that where the focus is? Would that be fair to say?
We're focused on both. I think my team right now is focused on the latter part, but remember Diablo 4 is a large team with many different sub-teams. I'm on the live team. So my focus right now is kind of endgame because that's just what we see as a place we could do better. But there are people on the team absolutely focused on new player experience, new player how they interact with the game, returning players that have, they played the original campaign and then left and they're coming back. That's a discussion that we're having as well. How do we make that experience the best that we can? So there's actually a lot of different classes of players and the types of people that play Diablo 4 because it's such a large game. We're trying to appeal to many different types of people that play RPGs and even those that this is their introductory game. So our task is a little different than some other games where, they have a more specific focus. We try to grab it all. We're greedy, but we want to make sure that our game's good for both parties. And that does mean there's some sacrifices sometimes, but we really are like trying to make it good for all of them.
That's fair.
It's a hard problem, but that is actually what we're trying to do. Like high level vision.
Let's just move on to the next question since we're kind of limited on time.
Yeah.
Let's talk about overworld content since that is literally the identity defining for Diablo 4, right? Mm-hmm. And the question we have is, what are the team's thoughts on the potentials of strongholds and bosses having a bigger role to play moving forward?
Oh, strongholds and bosses. I guess I'll ask you a question back. I can give you a very easy answer, and that answer will be we think they're cool and we could work on them. Or I can give you like something I think is a lot more interesting and maybe an in-depth discussion. I'll leave it up to you guys. But
let's go for the latter.
Yeah.
All right. Because I find this very interesting. Why strongholds, why we design them and what we think about them in Bora bosses. So I think there's a concept that's very interesting. I would advise you and any of your followers who really want to get into game design or want to talk better about game design. There was a really great GDC presentation made by a guy named Alex Jaffe. He's from Riot, actually. And he gave one of the best presentations I've ever seen on game design. And he gave the presentation on something called cursed problems in game design. And I promise this will lead back to Strongholds very directly. But what a cursed problem is in game design is this idea that when you make a game of a certain archetype, you immediately make a bunch of promises to the player, and these promises come with problems that we call cursed problems. There are these things that are so fundamental to the foundation of your game that you can't get away from them, and they're kind of your partner forever or weight on your back that you have to deal with that you never get rid of, but you can mitigate. I'll give an example of a cursed problem in another genre in game. I used to work on Heroes of the Storm. It's a MOBA, right? Like League of Legends. If you ever played League of Legends, you'll hear this complaint a lot of matchmaking and playing a team-based game by having individual progression, right? The promise that you make when you play a MOBA or a team-based game is that you are playing with other people. But one of the big things that they sell you on when you play the game is that you have a ranking system that's based on your personal improvement. So you're being ranked individually, but you go into a team game with 9 other people, and those other people can interact, and you can have a game where you couldn't have won no matter how good you are because those people impact your performance. And so you commonly get the complaint of, hey, I went into a team-based game, I did well, but my teammates suck and I'm mad because I lost ranked points, right?
I played
very
League,
common.
Sure.
This is a cursed problem of matchmaking-based, team-based games where your motivation that we promise you is individual performance. How about Diablo? Let's tie it back to Diablo. A cursed problem, I would argue, in ARPGs like Diablo and any other game, you'll probably have seen this problem, is that they are games of efficiency. We promise you player power is a big reason why you play these games, is you want to go in, you start off as this peon person that kind of sucks and isn't very strong, and you grow into this really crazy master of magic or strength or whatever that can do incredible things, right? And the way that we deliver you on that promise is we give you power as you play the game more and progress through the activities, usually in the form of gear, but also in other ways too, right? Skill points, Paragon, whatever it is. What that translates to is that anything that you are doing in the game that isn't progressing your power is very hard to sell a player on,
Sure.
to make them want to do it. And it's even harder to sell them if it's not a repeatable activity that they can keep doing to get stronger and stronger. The way that I describe cursed problems or think about it is like when you ask me, hey, Adam, what do you think of strongholds or world bosses or Uber Lilith balance or a whole lot of other problems? I would think of these cursed problems like a tree. And the cursed problem is actually the trunk, the center of the game, what the game actually is and why you come to play it. And you're asking me about a leaf at the very edge of the branch. And so I can give an answer like, yeah, the leaf, yeah, it's cool. We could work on it. But like really the leaf connecting to the branch connecting to the trunk, this is what's actually causing the thing that you're asking the question about, right? So when it comes to strongholds, why do you ask me the question like, hey, what about strongholds? Can we make them better? The reason why it's a question that people ask, I think, is because strongholds are intended, and why they are cool and why they go against the rest of our game and why it's really hard for us is that they are meant to be one-shot, awesome, kind of story-based, really handcrafted, curated content, right? I would equate this to Uber Lilith statues, where we got this question the other day.
Sure.
The campaign experience, we get a question. These are all actually the same question, which is, hey, you people on D4 made this one-shot experience that we really love and is cool. We want to do it more. The problem is the moment you cross that line from one-shotting and it being cool to being a repeatable activity, now that activity is competing with everything else in the game that is repeatable content. Because now Strongholds has to compete against Helltide, Nightmare Dungeons, The Pit, Gathering Uniques, all of that, or has to fit in there in some way.
So one question about that then. So what makes Strongholds different? Like, why can't we do an Uber version of a Stronghold since people say they want to replay it, but we can do an Uber version of bosses that are already in the game? So we can do the level...
We absolutely... Yeah. I understand your question. We absolutely can, is the answer. But then you've changed it. The fundamental relationship that you have as a player with Strongholds is different now. You've changed it from one shot, this is a cool experience that's very unique, and that is what the fantasy is of people that like it. Now you've changed that to repeatable content that you're going to do 10, 20, 100 times over. And the thing is, a lot of content, and this is where it's kind of a cursed problem in RPG, we think of every content type that we add this way. Is it repeatable? Is it not? And the way that you design that content is very different. Because if it's repeatable, that means that you have to design the content in such a way that it is fun 100 or 1,000 times. That puts a lot more design constraint and limitations of what you can make that content. As an example, or many examples, when we launch the game, you can even think of some when you think of your experience with the game. When you do something 500 times, you care about things that you wouldn't care about if you did it one time. This is why, for example, I get questions a lot of can you let us reset boss rooms? Why do you want to reset boss rooms? It's because you do it 500 times and it sucks to do that every single time. If you had to do it 1 or 2 times ever, you wouldn't care very much. Why did you have to ride your horse to Nightmare Dungeons when we launched the game?
It's fair.
It was fun the first time, world building, immersion, really cool. Doing it 500 times because that's all that you're doing at your end game, not so fun.
So would you be concerned? Would you be concerned about the same issue with the new 200 bosses? If, let's say, you took some of the rewards, okay, and added like Uber, this just for the sake of the debate here. So let's say we wanted Uber Strongholds, and you say, well, DM, you liked it the first time. You might not like it the 100th time. And I say, fair enough. But then I come back with you and say, okay, well, what if we took some of the rewards I would either get from the pit, like a grab bag? We take some of the pit rewards, we take some of the Uber level 200 rewards, and we throw almost like a world boss loot pinata as an option to be one of these mountains that you mentioned earlier. Maybe we don't want to make it the best thing. Maybe we want to make it a breakup of the experience so that we can get basically the same resources we got to get literally anyway from something else, but it gives us variety in terms of gameplay. Now, I'm not arguing this is the best way to go with the game. I'm just curious about the thought process behind that.
I think that's a good question. The answer is yes, we can. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Usually it doesn't. The reason why, in my experience designing ARPGs for a while now, is it's really hard to tell somebody, hey, you have option A and option B. Option A is 100% efficient. Option B is 70% efficient. What does 100% of players do? Maxroll makes guides. What is the best Nightmare Dungeon you want to do? Everybody makes guides. What is the quickest way to do the thing? What is the most efficient? People are going to do the thing. And it's not like if something is 100% efficient versus 50%, that 50% of players do the 50% and the other half do the 100. That's not how it works out in player behavior. It's 99% of people do the 100% efficient.
That's a fair
thing, right?
counter. That's a fair counter.
I'm not sure I agree entirely. Like I'm a player that I guess I would qualify as a blaster, not a casual player. But I feel like what makes an ARPG great is to make people distracted from the fact that they are playing an ARPG. Because in reality, an ARPG game is honestly the very definition of insanity. We are doing the same thing over and over and over again with the only goal of improving our character to continue doing the same thing over and over again to do the same thing. And the best ARPG is the game that you can play would be a game where you are distracted from the fact that you're doing the same thing over and over again. So having options, whether or not they are slightly less rewarding, is another part. That's another topic. But the fact that you have options to engage with for the sake of in-game replayability, longevity, would allow you to be distracted from that fact and actually enjoy your time. That's the way I see it. So I'm not sure I entirely agree with that.
I completely agree with you. I want to premise this. I'm presenting to you the problem. I'm not saying that a cursed problem has no solutions and no ways to make it better. The bulk of my time is spent trying to answer the questions that you guys just asked and do it in a way that does make it better, even though I know it's a problem that will never be completely, absolutely solved, right? We do things like this. Some ways, for example, that we get you to do a variety of activities, because we do want you to, is like a common strategy is we gate certain rewards behind certain activities, which makes you need to go and do multiple things, right? Like you have Glyph XP in Nightmare Dungeons, you have the Helltide, the Cinders and Helltide that you couldn't really get very easily. Like we have things that are special to them to make you go around. I think a better solution, we've kind of moved a little bit more in this, is you can get things, you get some activities or materials or whatever from many places. There is one place that is the most efficient, but you're getting pseudo efficiency somewhere else, and that feels really good. Example of this would be doing Helltides with Whispers, right? If you're doing Helltides and you want Varshan materials for Whispers, double dipping on that feels really good as a player. And we want to do that and do that more. And that, I think, is kind of an answer for your Uber Strongholds question. I'm not saying, by the way, my answer is not we can't do Uber Strongholds because of these problems. Sure. What I'm saying is I'm trying to teach you why it's not so easy as just like, hey, make Uber Strongholds replayable and now everybody's going to love them immediately, right? We were changing a content type from a one-shot. This is kind of similar to the campaign idea, right? Of changing the campaign experience from a one-shot to a feels good 100 times. We have to think about that. We think about that content differently now. Totally. And that requires a little more thought and care, not just in rewards, but how it feels to go through it over and over again, right? Because it's fixed.
That's fair
and we
enough.
need to have some randomness to make it feel better as you're going through it over and over. It's
Makes
just there's
sense.
more problems that we have to solve. Right?
Okay, it's a consumable. It's designed consumable. You make it into something repetitive. It changes the fundamentals of how you originally created it. I can understand the take. I appreciate that. I'll move the conversation on here so we can get into some of the other questions we still have here. So currently, build variety in the game is mostly designed around item modifiers. So like unique items, Lidless Wallets being one example. It just fundamentally changes the way a skill works here. Has there been discussion from the team around modifying skills potentially outside of unique items, like within Paragon boards, other inventory-based items, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah. Fun fact, when we were originally designing things in the game, a lot of the changing of the skills was actually in the skill tree and in we called them maybe choices, but the different upgrades you could get for your skill. The original thought behind it was like, you can make your, frozen orb, like option A is like way different than option B, where they're almost like different use cases for the skill. Right. And we moved a little bit away from that. Some of them are still a little transformative. I think that we can make them a little bit more so in the skill tree as we do in the future. That's one way that I think we can make the skill tree interesting without introducing a bunch of complexity. My favorite example I give to people on my team is kick, even though kick isn't that popular of a skill. But the difference between baseline kick and power kick, the upgrade where it changes into basically a core skill where it uses all your resource and does a buttload of damage to a person. You went from thinking of, this skill is like, you think of the geometry of the game and kicking enemies into walls. And it was too complex, I think, a little bit for what we launched with the speed of our game. But the idea was there of like, one way is you're playing 4D chess and you're rewarded. And the other way is you chase a resource and you just, this is Sparta somebody and kill them for 1 billion damage, right? It's completely different fantasies and ways that you interact with the skill. I think we could probably do a little bit more there with other skills to kind of make them transformative like that. We ended up doing more legendaries and uniques as the space that we do that because we knew that items were so important and being excited for a late game item to drop was was a very core part of the game. We've kind of now made that a lot better with like greater affixes, for example, and things in season 4. So I think there is more room to make transformative upgrades in other places than items. But I also am very comfortable with the system that we have now, and I kind of like it. It gives you obvious things to chase with items, and it feels good to get an item that is a big upgrade that changes how you play. So I guess I'd be open to feedback from people. Like, is there a place that you think is superior to items to get these kinds of effects? Like, is it cooler to have it be deterministic in the Paragon board versus you're farming for something and you see the moment that it drops that transforms your gameplay?
I mean, I'd be in the boat of saying, make the skill twig grow into a tree. That's kind of the boat that I'm sitting in. But and I also understand from the interview you had with Rax how that is. There's reasons for that, to keeping that simplistic. So it makes sense to have it in the endgame version of something dropping, or a gem, or whatever you want to go for, a power or unique item.
Yeah.
But how? Unless you have any follow-up questions at DM, I wanted to ask you about the how that fits into the philosophy of a lead class designer when it comes to the fantasies. These altering skills or uniques, whatever you want to go for, would have an impact on the class design.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure.
I'm going to try to reword that. That was horrible.
Yeah. No worries.
No, I was wondering how these unique items or skill altering modifiers, no matter where you get them, how that would impact the class design when it comes to focusing on keeping or maintaining the specific fantasies of classes.
Yeah. So when I think of a build, or our team thinks of a build, we try and think of the entire package and we compare it to the whole other package of a class. I don't think of a build like, I don't know, Frozen Orb, let's say, right? When I think of like the total power and coolness and strength and all of that, there's a journey that needed to be made, but I think of it as you end with all the things, right? You end with the conjurations, casting Frozen Orbs, and you're blowing up everything on your screen. It's awesome, right? So when we think about like designing a new class, or when we're first designing these classes, we have to think of, how do we make an interesting and good player journey from the beginning when you first use a skill, making that as impactful and cool as possible, while at the same time balancing against you need to leave room for growth and making things crazy and awesome to make it better. Some skills are easier to do than others with that, I would say. We definitely had a lot of things before the game came out, discussions about like, hey, this skill it feels really crappy early on. And we're like, yeah, it gets really crazy later on though. They're like, yeah, but who's going to pick it up if it feels really shitty early on, right? Like, you have to balance the two things. And that one is like, it's just a bunch of discussions and iteration, even when the game is live, of people complain about it, right? And we're like, yeah, we agree. And then we change it. Example, that would be like Barbs and Druids for a while have been complaining that early game kind of sucks, but then late game they're powerhouses, and that's kind of been the identity. And so we've been like alleviating over and over again of like, basic skills are a little better. They're a little better. We don't want to go too far, but we keep making them better, right? So that's kind of how we think of it. We think of the whole package and we try to make sure that your journey is enjoyable and good. And that's true, by the way, with items and tempering and stuff, right? We tried to create that journey in itemization. That was the point of season 4, because we think that's what makes a good ARPG experience.
Absolutely.
So we're approaching about 10 minutes or so left here, right around there. So we do have some rapid fire section, which, I mean, not all of these are just yes and no type things. So you feel free to talk about these. Don't have to just be like one word answers, but we have about 15, 20 of these. I'm going to try to blast through that. These are mostly primary questions grabbed from YouTube comments, grabbed from the chats, etc. The community just continues to ask over and over again. Some of these may have already been asked. Apologize if they have, but just because they've been spammed quite a bit. One of the ones that we've seen quite often is people are asking about raids. So we have overworld bosses, right? Pretty cool. People like them. It's like a big loot pinata every now and then. Is there any plans of further developments, or have you guys thought about potentially of raids like 8-man, 10-man, related to clans, larger size, basically?
Yeah. First, I would say this is just Adam's personal opinion, not the team, because I know everybody has different thoughts on it. But I think raids are interesting and cool. I think that they would present quite a few hurdles for us to overcome that make things tough. I think they're probably doable, but as an example of some of the things I think of right away that are like, oh my God, this is scary, is like, even now we have a problem where we're always competing against solo players' efficiency versus group play efficiency. There's a lot of people that play Diablo and ARPGs that really have a strong identity with wanting to play by themselves and not be required to go into a group. And if we put in this type of content where we say, hey, you must go into a group to play this, then we have to reconcile that of like, hey, how do we either balance that around, can solo players do all as well? And if they do,
Sure.
then why is it group content? Or yeah, too bad, you have to also be in a group to engage with this. And then that puts a lot of pressure on the rewards for that content, because if we make the rewards something that a solo player also needs, then we're making them go into a group when they may not want to.
Sure.
But if we make the solo, or we make the rewards for that type of content the other way, where it's not something you need, then why do people do it in the first place? So there's a lot of questions there that are noodly, that are tough to answer.
Sure.
But I'm really just describing the problem space. I do think, though, that overall, but the idea of getting with a group of your buddies or random strangers and doing like a 10-man fight on a huge, like, dungeon or whatever with a
Sure.
big boss at the end that requires mechanics, like, that is really cool and appealing. So
then
that's kind of how I think of it.
So I got two more quick ones here, and I'll pass off to GHAZZY. So in that case, then, if there's issues related to like forcing group play, basically, let's go the other way and say solo self-found mode. Now that trading is more common here with legendary items, etc., have we seen the potential for maybe adding an additional game mode or other game modes?
I think it'd be cool. Nothing to announce today.
Fair enough. Next one, PvP. There is a small but very passionate PvP community that is curious about further plans involving content specifically for these groups of people. I promised them I'd ask this one for them. What are your thoughts on PvP within the game?
Sure. Don't have anything to announce when it comes to PvP specific content. I would say I think we would be more interested from those people, like, what would they want to see from us? I would actually be curious about, of like, what do you want? Do you want like an arena type system where we pre-program your gear for you? Do you like open world? Do you want some type of different progression system? Kind of like the group versus solo play, the PvP versus PvE discussion is a little similar, of like, the more that we emphasize it or give unique rewards to it, the more that we're saying to everybody that doesn't want to do that, hey, you must do this to progress your character. And that's back to that, cursed problem, trunk theory. Like,
sure,
everything is about power progression. So the moment we put power in an activity that's a little more niche, then we can really make people unhappy if they have to engage with that. So like, what would they want to see? Do they want to see a better way of interacting with PvP? Is it just that the balance is crazy? Because I think that people kind of embrace the crazy balance in Diablo PvP.
Sure.
But that's where I think I would start the discussion.
Thanks for the answer. Gotcha.
That's fair. When it comes to these questions, these rapid fire questions, we got them from chat and from YouTube. And one of the questions that we wanted us to ask was, how can we see how long people have been offline in our clans?
Clan management issues currently.
Yeah. I'm not involved with that group, so I can't give it. I actually don't know, but I feel like that's very reasonable. I think we could bring that back to the team pretty easily. I will say we do have a team that works on like UX issues, user experience issues, and they are the ones that kind of look at stuff like that, like the ideas that we get over like Group Finder or Armory Party Finder. This type of support, we have a team that's looking at it. I know that they're working on stuff, but I actually don't have complete insight into what they're doing, but that seems very reasonable to me.
Stuff. I like it. The next question is actually about pets in game. And we're talking about non-combat pets, ranging from cosmetics to maybe loot pets that might only loot gold or something. Is that something that's been discussed? If so, what can you share?
We have discussed it. I think it'd be cool. Don't have anything to share.
All right. Next question would be, sorry?
Oh, go on. I was just going to read the next one.
All right, it's just DPS meter and dummies. I would love to see that, because you can't really see it when you have a minion army hitting a dummy. I'd like to have DPS meters. Is that something we're going to see in the future?
Yeah, think it's cool. Don't have anything to announce.
Fair enough.
But I'm actually thinking a little bit more about that. And maybe feedback would be useful of like, is it really only on dummies that you want to do it to test builds, or would you want to see it in the rest of the game? DPS meters are kind of notorious in other game types, but I'm not sure that we have the same problems.
Sure.
Of people being upset with each other for not doing as much damage and all that kind of stuff. But
fair enough.
I feel like it'd probably be fine, or at least for a personal one.
I know this one's probably like you can't go anywhere with this, but offline mode, is there any potential for an offline mode in Diablo 4 at any point?
I have not heard any discussions about it. I would doubt it. Okay. I think I'm a little more sure I could say, but I don't see it on the horizon. But
fair enough.
I'm not in charge of those kinds of decisions.
Glyph leveling and quality of life. Is there any potential for glyph leveling outside of Nightmare Dungeons? Are we going to add experience to glyphs elsewhere in the game?
We've talked about it a bit. Nothing to announce. I think, kind of going back to the idea with Helltides and Whispers, I think it is cool to have a less efficient way to do something while you're being efficient doing something else. That's my personal opinion, though, and kind of what I feel. But I'm not on the systems team and don't know the nuances of glyph leveling specifically and why we keep it in one place. But I wouldn't be surprised, I guess, is what I would say. But I don't have a guarantee there.
How about things like surprise events, like i.e. Goblin Vaults from D3, for example? You get a ring, you go to secondary, they can pop out, or pour those to other types of things. Any surprise ambush related event type of stuff? We have the Goblin Packs, for instance, which is pretty cool in D4, rare but cool.
Yeah, I was gonna say we've added a couple in season 4, kind of mini events where like you have a chance when you kill an elite and it'll spawn into like a ton of gold or a ton of materials or things, or give you way more than normal. We like the idea of surprise events. I think you can expect us to make more in the future. That is one way, kind of like what I think it was GHAZZY, I think you said, of like we want to break up the monotony and we're trying to make sure that it feels different even though you're doing the same thing. And I think surprise events is one of the ways that we do that. Sometimes it's more successful than others, but it's definitely something that we want to continue to chase because we think overall it's good. It's just about how exactly to implement it.
That's fair. What's the team's position on support builds? Like back in D3, we have CDPS, Demon Hunters, and Barb style builds. Do they have a place in D4 moving forward?
That's a good question. I think so, but we have to be careful. We were a lot more scared about it when we launched the game. I remember people kept asking me, like, Adam, can we make more support builds, make more things? Of like cross synergy is really cool, and I agree it's cool. The other side of that is kind of that issue we deal with forever of group versus solo play, is that the better we make a support build, the more we're saying the best way to play this game is to go with 4 people, support your friends, and you get multiplicative, massively increased amounts of output, right? So I think we do want it. We have it a little bit with Barbarian Shouts, right? And we've even added some legendaries that do it. Like there's a Druid one that turns your Blood Howl into an AoE buff. But I don't think it's one of those we have to walk the line very carefully, I think, because it can be very detrimental to the game if we go too far.
All right.
But I'm not against it as an idea at all.
Okay. Jumping over to the next one real quick with opening community events. Way back to like Blizzard, AQ openings in World of Warcraft, for example. Community designs a legendary. Any sort of that community events surrounding those things. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it'd be awesome. I'm not against it at all, but those are checks that I can't cash. So, yeah, I would love to. I'm not going to make it, but yes, I would love an AQ event like that in D4 or something, or even community making a legendary. Oh, how scared am I of that? Or unique? I don't know, probably, but we can find a way to balance it. I don't know. I think it'd be cool. I think it'd be neat. Yeah, I'm on board.
I'm going to throw you a quick one with something that's close to my heart, and that's map overlay. And before you say immersion, I'd like to say that a lot of people will say, let us play the game we want to. What's the thoughts on map overlay moving forward?
This is personal Adam thoughts, not company thoughts, because everybody has different opinions, I think. And we've talked about map overlay internally quite a bit. I think map overlay, it's one of those where there's such obvious pros and cons, and I think different types of players really want to engage in different ways. I personally am not completely against a map overlay being in the game, but I understand why there are people that feel strongly that we really don't want to try and make a game where you're looking at your map the whole time and not all of this beautiful world and art and things that we've created to try and immerse the player, and then they're so into the systems and the efficiency game that we pull them out of it. And I think it kind of goes back to kind of what you said of like, ARPGs, we really want you to, we know it's an efficiency game, but we don't want it to feel that exposed all the time that you must feel pressured to do things perfectly all the time. And a map overlay pushes that pretty hard. So I see both sides. I think I'm a little bit personally in favor of just having it because people want it, but I understand it changes the game pretty fundamentally for a lot of people, and there's a pressure there now. It's kind of like DPS meters in many games too, I would equate it to. Like the moment you introduce that, you kind of can't go back, and you've changed how people interact with your game forever. And so even if people want it, I see why it's a tough topic.
We're actually doing pretty good on time. We're almost through the rapid fire. We just got a few more here, and then we pretty much are GG out the door here. So Ultimate Button, this is something that gets brought up a lot. People have asked, can we get a separate button for the ultimate?
Yeah. Maybe. I'll explain
Maybe.
the problem space of why. Yeah. So when we're thinking about Diablo and why we don't have more extra buttons or like an ultimate button or whatever, is that we thought heavily and worked long and hard deciding the number of buttons that you're going to have total on your bar at all. And those buttons were determined by thinking of how many different actions do we want a player to worry about at any given time. And right now we have, you have evade, you have potion, you have your regular ones on your bar, and then your core and your basic, right? If you have a basic. Adding another button is something that we could do. I mean, controller issues aside and making that feel good. It's a matter of how complex do we want to expect every single player to interact. And at the time at launching the game, we wrestled back and forth with this a lot. And at the time, our idea was we would rather have something like an evade button that really everybody can use and makes the game feel very different. And it's kind of like, this is very different than other RPGs, than a specific ultimate button. There's also would need to be a lot of rebalancing of ultimates when we fully expect people to have one versus that they can choose whether or not they do. That work we could do, I think. It's more of like, do I want to balance and design everything assuming a player has an ultimate in addition to all of their other skills, and what that means to how we have to change ultimates or do other things. I think it's doable, but I don't know that I'm very excited about the prospect unless there's a very clear win.
Okay, can understand that. A couple just fast ones, so I don't have to go in depth on just some transmog things. People are asking maybe a color wheel for transmogs as opposed to just like red, green, blue. Any thoughts on adding like a color wheel?
Yeah, it seems cool.
Okay.
It's not my team, but yeah.
Non-horse mounts. Pretty much all the mounts are horses. Can we get like a maggot or anything else, spider?
I think we should, and I wouldn't be surprised if we did it, but I'm not involved in those conversations. But I personally feel like it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, same. I agree. I'm glad we agree on that. Okay, wings, kind of controversial, but a million people ask me wings. Are we ever going to see wings in D4?
Yeah, that's a little more controversial. I would say I don't know about the future. I can explain a little bit of where we're at now, and I'm not even completely involved in this. This is a little bit of my opinion because I didn't make these decisions, but. Return to Darkness was one of our big guiding philosophies when we were making D4 up to launch. And this idea that, hey, this game is going back to kind of D1, D2 roots of being scary and a little more, gruesome and dark and dreary. And we even with the combat, that's why we have evade, is like you have to dodge attacks and really plan because this world is dangerous. In some ways, we've learned that players, want to blast and they don't care as much. As we over-indexed a little bit on it. Sure. But it is still something that we care about. So like now before Wings was kind of in that, it's making the game a little bit, it doesn't fit the vibe we're going for, but we've moved a bit. But have we moved enough that Wings are okay now? I don't know.
Fair enough.
It's like I think we're right there. I could see it being either way, but that just explains kind of how we got here. So
fair enough. I get that. We only got like 3 questions left here, really. So the last transmog related or cosmetic related question is: can we get cosmetics potentially for minions? I know GHAZZY probably would like this one.
I think it would be cool. It's a lot harder to do for minions than for players, though, or even like wings, because you can have a million minions on your screen, and how loud that is a concern. But I don't think it's an impossibility. I'd like to see it. I think it'd be cool. Same with Druid Transform Transmogs. I think would be cool, but that's just my opinion.
All right. Go for it, GHAZZY.
Speaking of being scary, what about a unicorn level? Cow level? Is that ever something that's going to happen? Because we've all been hunting for it.
A unicorn level? That sounds neat. I don't know what you're talking about with the other one.
There it is. And shout out to Rax. Uber Tomb Lord win?
I think it'd be cool. I'm down. I don't know, whatever people want to fight. I mean, we could make it.
All right, and we pretty much are hitting the end of the time here. I want to thank you for your time. I will submit there's a couple other there like bug reports that I'll just DM over as well, and we'll skip those ones. And we just hit our 45 minutes, so I appreciate the time. Thanks for answering all the questions. And we actually managed to get through pretty much the entire list, including the rapid fire. So you done good, son.
Yeah, that's great.
I appreciate it. Any last words or anything you want to say?
I would say, first, thanks to both of you for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you.
We really enjoy these conversations. I look forward to doing more. For everybody else, one of the things I'm really passionate about, like first, go listen to that presentation that I talked about on cursed problems. One of my goals with getting in front of people and talking with them, and I've done this ever since I started as a developer. You can go look at interviews with me years ago from Heroes, but I like having better discussions with you all and with players that are a little more informed. So as people get passionate and want to learn about game design, it's easy just to be like, hey, why don't you add this? And we can answer those questions. But I like more in-depth ones, and we do on the team of like, hey, why does this work the way it does? And can we find a way to make it work and get what we want, right? Like when you counter back at me with like the Strongholds question, like, can't we, okay, Adam, I listened to you. I understand your problem space. Now that I've thought about it, can we do this and why or why not? Like that to me is a better discussion and a better culture, a better world, really, if I want to get sappy of like, be informed when talking about things and care about it and think about it and don't just blast like, hey, just do this, right?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to be a game dev either. It's not like I would.
Yeah, and I'm not saying everyone has to be a game
dev.
dev. I just mean like if you care enough to really want to know, like, think about it and have real discussions. And so I want to be a force for that, I guess, in the community. And I think other people on our team do as well. So
thanks, man.
Yeah, but I really enjoyed the time. So enjoy talking with you both.
I enjoyed
appreciate
that
you joining.
It was actually nice seeing the thought process behind it, and then like kind of in real time, because normally it's like you make a video, maybe you get a response about it or something, but it is kind of nice to see like in real time the feedback, because you're right, just during the very brief conversation about Strongholds, like it did actually, I'm like, oh, it makes sense, it's a consumable design thing, kind of hard to turn into a repetitive exercise. So thank you for opening up about that. Guys, you got any last comments or anything you want to say?
Not really. I mean, I know you're a minion lover, so I want to get in on a deep dive talk with you someday about that. We do that on stream on the Tavern Talk someday as well.
Maybe we can someday. No, yeah, I my roots are in RTS, where I manage 1 million little units, and I love minion stuff and everything. So
sounds good, Ben. Thanks for joining. Appreciate it.
All right.
Yeah,
cheers.
Thank you both very much.
We'll let you head on out the door here. We'll wrap up. And all right, we're going to cut back to the other screen and then cut the audio, and I will be back in just a moment, everybody. Bye-bye.